Hello and welcome back to Medical Compliance with Clarissa. I'm Clarissa Benfield, our Global Director and Business Line Leader for our medical and laboratory businesses here at Intertek. And today I am so excited to be joined by one of our cybersecurity experts, Nick Thomas. Hi, Nick. How are you?
Hi, Clarissa. I'm doing very well, thanks. Pleasure to chat.
Yeah, so excited to have you on today. So as I mentioned, you are one of our cybersecurity experts from Intertek EWA. Would love to have you introduce yourself to our audience, maybe a little bit of your background in the space, how long you've been with Intertek, what you do at our EWA group, and then we'll dive into our really great topic for today.
Yeah, amazing. Sure. So I'm a senior IT security specialist at EWA Canada. So I've worked in a number of critical domains over the past couple of years. So I've done I worked in the payment space. I worked in industrial automation, sort of where I land now, along with some medical. I do supply chain security now as well. I've kind of been all over the place. So,
which is great. It gives you a very varied background, which is perfect for our discussion today. And of course, on the podcast, we've talked about a lot of cybersecurity topics previously, a very interesting and very relevant topic for our medical device manufacturers. EWA has been part of our Intertek family for quite a few years now, of course, and so we've been working to support customers in the cybersecurity space. And one of the areas where, naturally we've seen a big progression and a lot of traction is in the 81001-5-1 standard. That's obviously becoming a lot more prevalent. We've done trainings on this standard. We have a lot of manufacturers reaching out with questions. But sometimes one of the things that come up is you have the 81001 standard, you also have the 62443, and how those interact together. Is one better than the other? Do they map to each other? What is the history between kind of the two different but the same sort of standards?
Yeah, sure. So, like you said, they do kind of they go a little hand in hand. So ultimately, 62443 came first. I don't even know the year anymore, but it's quite an old standard, originally for industrial automation and control systems. 81001-51 is the same as a 6244341. So ultimately, 62443, it's a whole family of standards. There's like couldn't even tell you how many now, but they all cover various things. So, like I said, 81001-51 is the same as the 6244341. So that covers your software development lifecycle, just with a little more nuance. Otherwise, the clauses are basically identical.
Which is helpful for those who are familiar with the 62443. But
for sure.
But for those who are just learning the standard, right, who are just getting new into the space, you should be following, if you are a medical device manufacturer, starting with the 81001-5-1.
That's correct. Yeah. So ultimately, 62443, that's for industrial automation and control devices. Original intent was things like, really IoT devices that have a physical address, right? Like, so yeah. If you look at the certification register, it's like dams, power plants, big factories, stuff like that, right? And then, 81001 is for medical devices. So
there be instances where you would be following the 81001 and then pull things in from the 62443 as a medical device manufacturer, or really just start with the 81001 knowing that it's mapping to the 62443 clauses from the -4 you said, right?
Yeah. So ultimately, unless there's a reason for you to get a 62443, it's better for medical device companies to go straight to an 81001-51 and go from there. Like one case maybe where you may want to pursue something like a 62443 is if like a hospital or some other large control system where your medical device was being used was itself 62443 accredited, and it was going to be a component that goes inside of it.
So that's something for people to consider if they have large capital equipment that's going into that type of infrastructure.
Yeah, for sure. So, there is a case where that could happen, but I would say that's relatively few and far between. For the average customer that we're speaking to in these training sessions, customers we're working with, other workshops, generally the right move for them would be go straight to 81001-51. But there are cases where, yes, 62443 would be something to consider.
So as someone is planning their process, right? Okay, we'll start with 81,001.
Sure.
Again, we know that's a process-based standard. 62443 is a process-based standard. So how do you actually evaluate the compliance itself? Let's say, okay, we've determined we're going to 81,001. That's what makes sense. We're going to follow that standard. It's a process-based standard. We will only pull in 62443 as necessary, but we know that the clauses map to each other, right? So now we have a clear idea where we're going. How do we get started with the actual process evaluation in and of itself?
Yeah. Okay. Great question. Two avenues. So the first avenue, self-explanatory. It's just complying to all the clauses in 81,001. That's kind of how you kick that off. Alternatively, if your device is something that is it's been kicking around for a while, maybe it's deployed out in the field, there's another avenue called transitional, or Annex F is sort of how we refer to it colloquially here. So how this would basically work is whoever your assessor is or yourself, there'd be a big sort of workbook, right? With each clause from 81,001. And then you go through and you would map everything to it. You map all your documents to it, map a statement to each one that says, here's how we do this, right? Here's how our secure development lifecycle meets this clause. Yeah, and then from there you map your existing evidence to what you wrote.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because
Sure.
before we get people too nervous or too scared, what are we talking about? So you say it's a workbook, right? What does that mean? How many clauses are there? What are we looking at in terms of volume, number of requirements? So I'm a manufacturer, right? I'm following this 81,001 path. Well, what are we talking about in terms of how much I have to meet the requirements for?
Yeah, sure. Off the top of my head, I think it's 73 clauses
Okay.
that are in this workbook for each one. So basically, okay, I'll go back a little bit to 62443. In 62443, there's a scoping concept where the manufacturer has the option to remove things from scope. That's not the case under 81,001. In this workbook for an 81,001, every single clause is going to apply to the manufacturer, all 73, unless something is like very clearly doesn't apply, right? So
Mm.
obviously the medical devices that are covered under this are like a million and one shapes and
Yeah, of
forms,
course,
right?
yeah.
It could be, like an MRI machine can run up to 20 operating systems on it at a time. But there could just be like a simple sensor, right, that has some data in and out. So obviously, there's a lot of different things in there. So in some cases, 81,001 clauses will not apply to a device, right? So for example, if it's a disposable device, maybe there's no software updates to this, right? It's designed to be thrown out
Mhm.
after each use or something. There's no reason to update that. So there are cases where all 73 maybe don't apply, but otherwise, yes.
In most cases, you will have to comply with every requirement, which again, for medical device manufacturers, I mean, 73, that's, comparatively to what they have to comply with on the safety side, not that big of a deal, right? Okay, we have to comply with all of those. Let's say for some reason, I'm saying, no, I absolutely do not think that this requirement applies to my product. It doesn't apply to our functionality or what we do. The rest of the other 70 do, but these two or these three or whatever don't. Do I have to provide a justification, a rationale? Do you write not applicable? Like, how does that work in practicality if you decide that, I am very firm in the fact that I don't think it applies?
Yeah, sure. So pretty much hit it with an NA, and if you're working with a lab, generally they're going to ask you for a rationale, basically, like why doesn't this apply, right? Why are you not providing security updates to your medical devices? Obviously, that's a pretty loaded question, but
Yeah.
then they go to explain, okay, maybe we don't do it because you only use it one time, right? And you buy a new one after each injection or whatever it may be. It depends on the medical device. There's so many different shapes and sizes.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, now too, Nick, right, we've seen a lot of these coming through, right? So now that the standard has been published and actually been put into practice, we've talked about this a few times on the podcast before when the standard was just starting to come out, or we've seen the regulators, seen Japan push for it, but now we've actually seen people complying and following this process. So,
Yeah.
just in a generic or even anecdotal sense, as they're coming through, how easy is it for someone to comply with all of these requirements? Like, are we seeing manufacturers actually having success saying, yes, I can map myself to every single one of these clauses in the workbook? Here's my single statement. Here's how I meet this requirement. Here's my evidence, and we're good to go? Or are there areas where we're seeing maybe a bit more of a struggle or a bit more of a challenge from the manufacturer side as they're trying to document this?
Yeah, sure. Let me. I'll break it into two parts here. I'll talk about kind of how it goes for people, and then we'll jump into sort of some pain points or otherwise sort
Yeah,
of
I love that. Okay.
funny stories, I suppose. So ultimately, so like I said at the beginning, there's two paths for you, right? There's the first path is full compliance, right? Go through, fill out every single thing. This is generally the more common approach we see now. Um, and usually it's not just one round, right? Maybe you think you meet something, but it doesn't necessarily fully meet the clause, or maybe it hits A and B but not C, right? Something like
Mhm.
that. So generally, I would say there are multiple rounds, and then and there's no shame in that, right? Like it's a kind of third party evaluation for a reason,
Yeah.
and yeah, so it works.
So people shouldn't be
It all
expecting
depends.
that they're going to go through one and done, right? They shouldn't just be
Exactly.
expecting that there's going to be no comments back. And again, on the medical side, we do this with risk management, right? They go through this process with other process type reviews. So it's not, oh, we filled it out, everything's good to go, we're going to get our seal of approval, right? It is iterative,
Yes.
right? There will be back and forth.
Very true. Yes. The second one I was sort of talking about was the transitional, right? So generally, this would be applied for older devices that are maybe out in the field, and yeah. So there's a different case there. So that's the Annex F I was talking about earlier. This one, it's not a shortcut. Some manufacturers consider this, oh, maybe this is the easy way, right? We don't have to apply these new, maybe missing processes by the
Yeah.
time we're doing this. Generally, it's a lot harder. Transitional, it's there's a little bit more there. There's some you simply must comply with. These are kind of the overarching ones, but then there's other items as well where gap assessments are required, and sometimes these gap assessments can take a little more effort than simply just writing the process and following it. So yeah, there's just the two options there that are sort of presented to every manufacturer.
Yeah, so a little bit of a misnomer with the transitional, people thinking like, oh,
Mhm.
hey, it'll be like a gap or a place where you can bridge in between, which it is intended to be, but that doesn't mean it's going to be an easier process, or you're going to have to comply with less requirements, or you're going to have some sort of smoother pathway, right? It really is for those old legacy devices or acquired devices and technologies, right? It's something that maybe you don't have all of that information readily available for right in a given moment.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
And then the goal is, right, that then you would go to full conformance at some point, right? Even if you follow transitional,
Yes.
you'll move to full conformance.
Yes, yeah. There's not really a hard deadline on there. It's sort of up to the manufacturer within reason to move to a fully compliant solution. But yes, the idea is that yes, we will be going forward with this full compliance in the future.
Well, and as we know, right, we see this is 81,001 is an FDA recognized standard. As I said, we see Japan
Yes,
pushing for it. We see,
yes,
NDR, right? So we have a lot of reasons why someone would want to be using this standard. So let's get into it again. As you said, we've done some of these projects now, quite a few actually. We've been working with manufacturers, as they've been trying to compile and complete this information. So maybe let's talk about some of the things that we've seen, some of the tips and tricks, things that have made it easier for people, or maybe things that have caused stumbling blocks along the way. What can we offer in terms of, now that we've been putting this standard into practice for a while?
yeah, absolutely. Basically, biggest advice I can give anyone: read through it and make sure you have the capabilities to support that. Right. So, for example, there's a lot of different requirements under the VA requirements. So in there, there's I think it's like three or four different requirements that you must do under the standard. So it's worth considering if that's something you have the capability to do in-house, or maybe you need to involve another party in your sort of your testing for that. So for example, under the VA, right, you'd have to do things like unexpected input testing, specifically for security issues. A lot of times they'll maybe do fuzz testing for kind of, not necessarily security specific purposes. That's something you have to do for that. There's also, identifying the entire attack surface, right? Maybe we've seen clients before where they necessarily don't consider all the ports on their device, right?
Mm-hmm.
They'll have something like a special port or something, but when we actually go to test it, it's just a different shaped USB port, right?
Yeah.
It functionally works with the USB. It's just something to consider. The other one there that generally clients would have the most trouble with is doing your software composition analysis on anything. So if you're using third-party libraries, maybe it's a little hard to do software composition analysis on
Yeah.
something you didn't write, right? Um, there's another little trick there too, where if you don't have these capabilities, or maybe you do have the capabilities and your developer can do this, do they have sufficient, I don't know what to call it, distance, I suppose, or separation? Like you can't do these tests on your own work, right? There's an expectation that there's some level of separation between the people who write this and the people who are performing these security tests.
Yeah, we definitely saw that too, right? With the FDA really wanting to see that, right? They want to see that separation. You can't, as you say, be the ones who are writing it and also be the ones who are testing it and then saying, yes, it's good to go, right? You have to have that level of separation and involve some sort of external party or working with enough distance in between so you can really prove that it's safe and effective.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, you please go ahead first. Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say one interesting one too that I find comes up in almost every evaluation is people will ask what the timeline to remediate a security issue would be. And the answer is there kind of isn't one. It sort of depends, right? It's up to the manufacturer to make that judgment on their own, their own sort of rationale. So it's not like the standard says, you must do this within 1 year, right? I would say 1 year is probably a long timeline for a security update, but maybe it's something where there's another compensating control, right? Maybe it's in an operating room, right, where you can just simply unplug it from the internet and it goes away until you can get a patch out in 1 year. It's sort of an interesting one. I will say one.
Yeah. I think that just puts so much to consider too, right? Especially in medical when we're looking at the risk of the devices too, right? So now there's security risk, right? And so now you have to consider that as well when you're doing your plan, right? What is the security risk of doing this now, doing this later? How long do you wait, right? There's all of that comes into play as well, not just patient data risk of data getting out or the product itself, or you have to kind of consider everything within the process. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. The other piece with that too is sometimes during these timeframes, your context of your product sort of shifts, right? We've seen products that were originally designed with their sort of risk identification for a secure operating room where no one can have access to it except surgeons. Yeah. And then it just, the product sort of begins to get easier to produce and it starts ending up in people's homes, right?
Yeah.
Clearly the security risks in someone's home versus something in a lockdown OR is a little bit different, right? So sometimes this, your timely delivery of updates, that can change within the year. It's just things to consider, right? For a medical device manufacturer.
Well, and when we think about timing too, right, that always comes into play with manufacturers. We're like, okay, we want to go forward with 81,001. We're going to think about doing this evaluation. What are we seeing in terms of like how long this is taking people to pull together all the information? How much back and forth is there? Like, going through this process together with the lab, what should people be budgeting as part of their overall kind of compliance timeline when they're looking at incorporating following this standard?
Yeah. So ultimately, it sort of originally it depends on the manufacturer. How ready are your documents, right? I would generally estimate it'll take at least 2 to 3 weeks for any manufacturer to get all their docs in order, right, ready for some external scrutiny. From there, I would say it takes maybe another 3 weeks for us to evaluate. Maybe there'll be 1 or 2 additional rounds at a week or 2 each, and then we'd be happy to issue a verification of conformance at the end. So all in, I would say probably 2 months or 3 months at a very sort of generous estimate. So.
And then that's the output that they get is that verification conformance, right? That says you are conforming to this standard on this given date and all of these requirements.
Yes, that's correct. Actually, that's sort of an interesting one because obviously the 62443 family is part of the IEC CB scheme. So there's an actual certificate that comes out of it. 81,001 is we'll produce a verification of conformance that says, we think that you are complying with all the requirements in this, and we'll put my name behind it. And so it's a little different than the 62443. But yeah, that's the end output is a verification of conformance.
And then I take that and I put that in my drawer with all of my other materials and say, okay, we're good to go. And I don't pick it up again, or I monitor it on an ongoing basis. I come back to the lab and update it. What is kind of the continuous process of keeping in that compliance or keeping in that conformance?
Yeah, awesome question. Basically, there's no expiry on these 81,001s as long as you're using the same process. As soon as you make like a significant change, right, or something, or we don't do our pen test in house anymore, then it's probably time to consider going back to a lab to have this reevaluated to make sure that it's still as it stands. Otherwise, as long as your processes remain the same, there's no expiry for the 81,151.
Yeah, and I think you touched on two things there. One, again, the reminder that although it is a process-based standard and not focused on testing, it does still point you to do the testing, right? So it's not, oh, this is just a process standard only, right? You still have to do the testing that you would on the outside anyways, right? And then the other thing that you note, right, is as it's based on a process and we're assuming your process isn't changing from product to product, right? You're not doing this a bunch of different times for a bunch of different products, right? You're doing this for your individual process.
Yes, yeah, it's on the process. So generally, you could even have this cover like a whole multitude of different products as long as they're all following the same software development process. So it sort of depends how the product was developed.
Yeah, and then if people are, again, you talk about, pulling all your documents together. We
Yeah.
see some manufacturers and some teams have a lot of resources in this area. Some are just getting into this area and maybe don't have as many resources or don't know where to start or how to pull their documents together or what to be doing. So are there ways that like we can help them on the front end to put those documents together or resources that we point people to, or is it just like you got to figure it out on your own? Like, how do you get started if, again, you want to be leaning on this standard and conforming with this standard, but it's not something that you've gone through before?
Yeah. Okay. Great question. Basically, if you recall, the 62443s is the same. It's the same standard. So if you need to look through and find sort of evidence or something, then maybe a 62443, you might be able to sort of search it up on the internet and see a sort of similar response. Otherwise, there's sort of other options, right? So I know I do a lot of workshops with clients to sort of get them ready, depending on their level of readiness, right?
Mhm.
If this is the first time they're kind of going through, I can sort of just explain how everything works, or maybe we can go through a couple documents together, or something like that. There's a couple different options for how this is done. I will note though that there is we do treat this with the same level of scrutiny as a 62443. So if someone's going through and helping you, edit your documents, they are not going to be your evaluator. We keep
Yes,
that
that's so, yeah,
separate.
so good to know. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So
of course.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is really great. So much information. And again, this has been such a hot topic for us. We've done several of these trainings. We've done a fantastic job training a lot of our medical manufacturers on the process and how it works. Again, we see lots of people asking questions on this topic. So is there anything else that we missed? Any other tips, tricks, or things that you want to add about the 81,001 at this point? I think we covered so much good information, but I just want to give you one last chance if there's anything we didn't get to.
yeah. The only last little piece of information is just because all your ports are kind of on the inside of your device, don't consider it that maybe this doesn't apply. We've seen things get kicked back because you can maybe go through the ventilation port on the side or something like that. So it's really worth considering all these things, contextualizing your device, and making sure you make the right decision.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Well, Nick, thank you so much. Again, as I said, we have a lot of resources out there related to cybersecurity for medical devices and specifically the 81,001. If anyone has questions, they can reach out to me directly. I'm happy to connect you with Nick and the team. But thank you so much for your time, and we'll chat with you on our next episode.
Thanks, Clarissa. Always nice to talk.
Yeah, thank you.